Well, I'd like to see, along with our usual accountability measures, so accountability measures from the students themselves. Like, do they feel that this is a class that invites them to come and learn? Do they feel belonging in here? What happens in this class when you make a mistake? Is it okay? And it really then highlights what it's like. Like, if they don't think they're learning, they probably aren't. And so we have to fix it. One of the things we found in a lot of our work, that a lot of our minority students say, the teacher doesn't like me. Now, it's just not true. The teacher does like them. But if the kid believes that, that's the problem.
Thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Dr. Rick Fernandez, and I have two very special guests. One is a world-renowned educator, leader, founder, and author of Visible Learning, Dr. John Hattie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here, Rick.
And I've got a Texan from Tyler, Dr. Lance Groppel, Deputy Superintendent. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Well, for that one person that may not know who you are as an educator, can you just give us a little bit of background on Visible Learning?
Sure. I've been fascinated over the years about why it is that every teacher has evidence they're making a change to kids' lives, and they all differ. And so I thought, could I come up with a way of finding out the relative effects of the various influences? So I scurried away in the back room and collected an incredible amount of meta-analyses. I'm up to 2,500 of them, about 400 million kids, to change the question from what works, because the answer to that is almost everything, to what works best. And then the hard part was working out what's the story behind those teachers and those schools that have quite a great impact on kids compared to those that don't have such a great impact. And so that's what the Visible Learning story is about.
And so as someone that's read your book, you know, that collective teacher efficacy, is it still the number one way to improve student outcomes?
Isn't it incredible that the number one influence is when teachers work together with other teachers, critiquing their evidence, critiquing their interpretation, critiquing what's happening in their classrooms? The kids are the biggest beneficiaries, and they're not even in the room. Yes, it still remains number one. That confidence, that high expectation that we collectively in the school can have every student gain at least a year's growth for a year's input.
So is the goal really to find an effective team that's organized, that's on the same mission, that creates goals? Is that really what we're talking about? It's like football, baseball, basketball. The best teams do the best.
Yeah, but I'll add an extra dimension, and I mean this very positively. Teachers of all profession are brilliant critics. It's the nature of the business.
I see Lance shaking his head over there.
And it's using that criticism to the positive.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of trust. And this is why it's hard to do. And sometimes trust is a lot higher in the classroom than it is in the staff room. And so how do I tell that, hey, it's not working as well in your classroom, I can help you? Not easy, but we need to do it because this teacher's sense of what that year's growth looks like, what progress looks like, needs to be contested. We have dominated by stunning schools and stunning teachers in our system, and we need to get all those teachers to that level.
Lance, I'm going to kick this one to you. When you think about your teachers and how Tyler ISD goes about growing their staff, what are some of the things that you all are doing or have done to really make an impact for your teachers?
Well, just to piggyback off of what John was saying, just creating the structures in place that allow that level of collaboration. When you think about a teaching staff that is much less experienced than it was 10 years ago, creating structures that take the highest yield, highest performing staff members and give them the opportunity to collaborate with their peers are only going to lift high tides lift all boats.
That's right.
The mindset that it really gives them the opportunity to do that when they have those built-in structures. And from a district perspective, it takes a pretty significant financial commitment to ensure that time is created within the school day for teachers to be able to do that. Now, the challenge on our campus administrator side, our teacher side, is to make sure that we're using that time efficiently and effectively to promote successful student outcomes.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that has always been how you go about creating your targets, your goals. But the flip side is I've never actually completed a New Year's resolution, right? So I have some goals that I've done really well with and others that go by the wayside. And Dr. Hattie, in terms of goal setting, what are some of the foundations that need to happen so that teachers and districts can really hone in on what their targets are?
You prepare your New Year's resolutions, and you probably tell very few people because you know you're not going to meet them.
That's right.
But the opposite in classrooms is that if the students don't understand what the goal of the lesson is, they're less likely to achieve it. Like, can you imagine anybody, you and me and a student, playing a video game if they didn't know what it meant to be successful? They wouldn't do it.
Right.
And so often in classrooms, we ask students to do work because they have to.
Yeah.
No wonder they get turned off. And what we found is that the more we make the goal transparent, the more successful and the more engaged the students are. Now, there's a skill in here, and that the goal can't be too hard, or else they won't bother.
Right.
It can't be too easy. Why would you do it? And it can't be too boring. The biggest problem in many classrooms is the work is too easy. They just have to do it. And in a lot of doing, there's no learning. But if you tell them what the goal is, like my obsession with Angry Birds, if I don't know what the goal is, I wouldn't play the game. But I'm obsessed. And I play the game. I get lots of feedback that helps me where I am in the game, how I get to the next goal. And when I get to the goal, it raises the bar. That's unlike a lot of classrooms where kids are asked to do something. And when they've done it, they hand it in regardless of the quality.
Right.
And they're told they've done a great job because they've handed it in.
Right.
In Angry Birds, they want to keep playing. There's a lot of analogy here that we can use in our classrooms to say goals are set very carefully above. Now, one of the critical things in goals, probably like your New Year's resolution, is you need to know where they come in. And sometimes kids can actually do the goal without any teaching. It's a bit of a waste of time. And so knowing a good platform, where they are, how they're going, and where they get there. And that's why I'm a great fan of assessment, because it can give you all that information.
You know, you bring up a point that I hadn't considered. You talked a little bit about the zone of proximal development, right? It's got to be in that sweet spot. But you mentioned it also has to be somewhat entertaining. You know, and Lance, when we think about our teacher groups, do you feel like we even engage in that? Or is it more about the adults and, like we were talking off camera, like our experiences, and we transfer our experiences to students? Should we have more discussion about, hey, is this even going to move the needle for a student sitting in my classroom in terms of just the enjoyment of it?
Yes, I think in pockets we do a really good job
Sure.
of ensuring that dialogue is a regular part of discussion around student achievement. I think one of the things that we work on as a district, we are a Leader in Me district. We use Franklin Covey,
Sure.
And really work with students to set their own goals. And so when we do beginning and middle of year assessments through IReady, students will then sit down with their teacher and set goals based off of their performance and how they did, to then have something to aspire to that is in that zone of performance that is not too hard, not too easy, and something that's gonna challenge them and promote their growth. But really, it's on the adults in the classroom to create that structure and ensure that they're having that dialogue with the kids, because the kids need to have a level of ownership in that as well. One of the things we encourage our campuses to do is engage their parents in that development as well, so they know where their kids are, so that they can support that at home. I think a lost art is that level of home support that was there 15, 20 years ago, that's not as prominent as you would see today. So the more we can engage that triangle of success around one individual kid, the greater the success that individual kids can see.
But can I raise a point, Lance, to emphasize what you said then? The kids don't set their own goals. The teacher sets their own goal. The kid sets their own goals with their teacher.
Correct.
Because quite often, novices don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is part of the subversive nature of teaching, is we imply the kids set the goals, but actually we're quite influential. Because sadly, some of our kids set easy goals because they don't want to fail.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's that notion of how we work together with them. But your point's absolutely right. If they don't know what the goal is, they're not going to be turned on to learning.
No, not at all.
You know, I want to get y'all's take on something. So a lot of the discussions around real-time data, and K-12 has really not had that, and is still struggling to find, can I get the information in a timely manner so I can adjust in the moment for students? Do you think that goal setting should be as flexible? So once we set our goals, if we're not evaluating them frequently enough, they lose their value. I mean, shouldn't we be looking at goal setting like we're looking at data, like almost as a moving target that we need to tweak?
Kinda. I want to make the analogy to a GPS.
Okay.
Like if you're going from Dallas to Houston, you know what your goal is to get there. But you know that there are multiple decisions you're going to have to make on the way, like where you got on the entry ramp, where you got on the exit ramp, where the accidents are, where the police people are, and all this kind of stuff. So GPS alters that, but you never lose sight of the goal, getting to Houston safely.
Right.
And safely is another part of it. So no, it's not. You're constantly changing your goals.
Okay.
So you have a longer term goal, and the work we do, we say 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Less than that, you're chopping and changing. Kids are confused.
It's too much change.
Too much change.
Okay.
And they get reinforcement for small changes and they get exhausted and they stop. But if they know it's to get to Houston. The other thing I like about the analogy is that there are multiple ways and multiple times to get from Dallas to Houston. There is nothing wrong with that. If I want to go and visit your city on the way, I get a bonus. I get to see the roses. If I want to go and stop at McDonald's, it's okay. Unfortunately, so much of our scope and sequence work is this is the right way to learn and you will go down this route. That is not the nature of children. They are all over the place in terms of where they go. There is no one right way, and I think that's really critical. So yes, goals, 8 to 10 weeks, and then multiple ways of checking. And sometimes you have to bring them back off the by roads onto the highway. Sometimes, okay, let's go this way, and we can still get there. But the one thing you don't want to do, halfway, they're on the wrong road, you bring them back and start again. They don't want to do that. There are lots of ways to get to Houston.
In hearing you say that 8 to 10 weeks is kind of the sweet spot, how critical is the initial goal setting and making sure that the targets are right? How critical is that in the process?
It's vital. Like, we've done so much work looking at teachers who have low expectations and set very short-term goals, and unfortunately they're very successful at not driving the kids very far.
Right.
If you have high expectations, and that's one of the things I really like about the IReady package, it's got stretch goals. The more you stretch goals, the more likely you are to get there. So fundamentally, we need to know what each teacher in the school's expectations are. And sadly, if their expectations is low, I don't care what you do, those kids will not succeed. They pick it up so quickly. The job here is just to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. If you don't push and stretch kids, as you said, with the stretch goals through IReady, you're still going to have that learning gap that exists between certain student populations, and the soft bigotry of low expectations is going to continue to promote that gap and the equity around that. And I think one of the things that I do like about IReady is that it does provide you those two different kind of goals. I think about my own children who are students in our school district, and I have stretch goals and have years worth of goals, and I get to be able to look at that and see where they meet their goals and that sort of thing. So I just think it's important for the expectations to be consistent, and to have some built-in success stories along the way. When you think about struggling learners, they're struggling for a reason, and they get beat down for not being successful, and we got to find those little wins along their journey. The shorter intermediate goals as opposed to that 9-week goal, 8 to 10 week goal that Dr. Hattie's talking about.
I think the worst thing you could ever say to a child is do your best, because that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to do better than their best. I want to help them exceed their expectation. And I think the other message coming through here is it's hard work. It makes your brain hurt. It's a struggle. And I want those things to be the norm. Now, there are times where we have to back off, but there are times we have to be intensive. But it is hard work. It is a struggle. And I think that's, unfortunately, some of our language at times gets in the way of us. I want every kid to struggle.
When talking with staff or district leaders across the world, what's the biggest pushback you get from either the goal setting process or any of your meta-analysis that they're like, all right, you got a lot of research behind it, but I'm not buying that?
Haven't got the time.
Yeah.
You don't understand the kids I've got. You don't understand my leadership. You should see the Texas curriculum. You should see the assessment press. And I look them in the eye and I say, those teachers in the blue zone have the same time, same kind of kids, same leadership, same curriculum, same assessment. How come they can do it?
And is it you feel like that's universal no matter where you are in the world?
And we've got a horrible language of autonomy. I have the right to teach as I like. My airline pilot doesn't. My doctor doesn't. My plumber doesn't. They're professionals. They adapt, they adopt, but there are ways which we know make a big difference when you do a surgery, when you fly an airplane. And I think we have got a corpus of knowledge in education where we do know what makes the difference. Like if I go into a school and I ask the students, how do you know? What do you know? What are you learning today? And how do you know it's good enough? If they don't answer that, I know I've got a problem school. If the kids don't understand that, that's our job.
Yes.
To teach them that learning is about knowing where you are, knowing how you're going, and knowing where you're going and closing that gap. And they should be part of the picture.
So why wouldn't we, and Lance, I'm going to throw this one to you, why wouldn't we as school districts take what we know to be the 5 best practices and let's get really good at these 2 this year or these 3 this year, and that's just what we do. I mean, I'm a sports guy, right? So everything is a sports analogy. So if you've got a play that's working,
right,
or these 5 plays work, we don't need 25 other ones because all that does is confuse and sap resources. Why not use those components to do well? And we just don't seem to do that. I feel like sometimes we get our scores back, which are coming out
right,
very soon. I know you're aware of that. And then we kind of scramble and try to figure out, all right, what do we do? What do we do? And sometimes we throw spaghetti against the wall, you know?
I think about our system. It's an autopsy of how we did,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's a look back.
Autopsy data.
Yes.
Yes.
It's an autopsy data. So I think part of our struggle is to ensure that we've got ongoing data coming in on a regular basis, and we're evaluating how that impacts our processes. One thing that we've embarked upon in Tyler ISD is the idea of an instructional playbook, to use your sports analogy and using the visible learning research to really highlight those really high yield strategies that are in that blue zone that are going to really have the greatest impact on student success, and putting it in a way for teachers to use that as a resource that they can reference. Hey, if I want to look at learning targets today, as I'm building my lesson plan for the day, I can look at what that looks like. We attach a video of what it looks like with a Tyler ISD teaching that instructional strategy. So they have that as that resource. Now we may have it a little bit longer than it should be and really not focusing on those 3 to 5 learning target ideas. But I think the more we can create resources that simplify the process and take my dad always used the idea of addition by subtraction, taking things off the teacher's plate, allowing them to really focus and get really, really good on something as opposed to trying to do a lot of things just okay. I think the more we can do that as district leaders and as campus leaders, I think the more efficient and more effective our staff will be. And I think you'll see more teachers pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone, trying the blue zone activities or blue zone strategies that are most effective. But it takes a level of vulnerability. It takes a level of getting outside of your comfort zone to be willing to take that risk and put yourself out there.
It would make sense that if instead of every time we react to scores or there's some piece of legislation that happens and then we rush to figure out, all right, what do we need to add? If on a yearly basis, we did an autopsy of what didn't work and what can we get rid of, right? And let's start there before we add anything else to our plates, our teachers' plates, our kids, the community, the parents. It feels like we should be doing that first and then looking at, okay, what do we need to really hone in on that's working well?
But you realize that's the hardest thing, getting teachers and principals to stop doing things that are inefficient. I would spend a lot of time looking at that for the reasons you raised. There's an obligation. If you're going to introduce something, you should stop something. And the whole de-implementation thing is really wrought with difficulties.
What do you feel like is the biggest barriers to just saying, look, that is not working, so
but I've always done it. I've always done it. It works for me. You say, but it doesn't work for the students. But this is how I do it. And that's the biggest problem is like we've gone into schools, we've shown principals, they collect all this data and they never use it. Why are you collecting it? We always do. And they often claim the mandate says. It's just not the case in many cases. And so it really is a pressure. And like we've identified about 60 to 80 different activities that have no effect whatsoever. Like putting stuff up on the wall.
Yeah. Word walls.
Yeah.
I'm guilty as charged. I did that as a teacher.
Some classes, it's great. Some classes, you take the kids out of the room and you ask them, what's on the wall? They haven't a clue. Do we really need? Now, I'm going to be careful here because I get into trouble on this one. Some teachers are passionate about their walls, but you got to seriously ask about how we could actually stop doing some of those activities so they can spend their time on what really matters, like getting them together collectively. They would much rather go back to their classroom and indulge in their passion.
Right.
Well, that's not going to help students. And so sometimes we do things that make it better for teachers, but not necessarily better for students. And I don't know a single teacher who came into the business other than to have an impact on kids. Keep reminding them of that.
If you're thinking about our new teachers, how do they learn? Because I'm assuming that's a learned behavior, right? You start off as a new teacher, you're blank slate. And so within a certain time frame, I think some of us fall into that same trap of, well, this is how my model teacher showed me how to do it. This is how I learned it. Where's that point of, man, we really got to retrain them now? Is there a good time?
Well, actually, it's a little bit more than that. The new teacher often teaches how their best teacher they had taught, which may not necessarily be in the interest of their kids.
Right.
There's a huge difference between like when I went through teacher training and now. Like in Australia, the average age of first starting to be a teacher is 36. It's a second and third career out of fourth or fifth.
Really?
These people who are coming in want to be collaborative. My day, we wanted to be alone. These people want to spread their impact greater. And what we're finding is the problem now is becoming teachers in their third, fourth, and fifth year. They're realizing that, hey, they either stay in the classroom for the rest of their lives or they want to spread their wings. And there isn't many opportunities to do that. And so I just find it fascinating that if you look at the teachers in the first 3 years, there's no journal, there's no association, there's no professional conference, there's nothing. There's hardly any books out there other than people telling them what they should do, other than Harry Wong's book on being the first few years, which is a stunner. They're on their own. And then we introduce this notion of, they need a mentor. Well, we know that that's a great answer, but only 5% of them get mentors that help. So what I'd love to see them do is to form a group amongst themselves. Oh my gosh, they are the most passionate, driven people you can find.
Because they're still in that,
Absolutely.
I can change the world.
But we keep saying, no, you sit down and we'll tell you. Or worse, I've done that. Here's all my resources. It's going back to what you were saying before, Lance. We know what the high implementation, high yield strategies are, but we mustn't forget that it's the implementation of it. And sometimes that's the problem. And that's what they're worried about. They're also worried about classroom management. If you're 4 or 5 years out, you've solved that problem. And often those first few year teachers come with a problem which turns out not to be the problem. So stopping, listening, and getting them to talk is much better than what we do. Here's the answer. So I'm with you. I think that we're not doing those first few teachers that well. Australia, we have 96% of our principals have an induction program they're very proud of which less than 40% of the new teachers know about. It's not working. They're inducted into the school, they're inducted into the state, into the curriculum, but virtually no one inducts them into the profession. If they don't get it, we lose them. And I think that's sad.
Yeah, one thing that we revamped our first year teacher academy in Tyler ISD last year and really focused on the Harry Wong revolutionary stuff from the early 80s of making sure that they understood what a good classroom looked like, right, and truly just induct them into the profession. We went from a mentor model to actually pulling them out and cohorting them amongst their peers by elementary, middle school, and high school to really emphasize the skill set that they needed. They were able to collaborate with peers that were having similar struggles as them. I think
problem solvers.
I think a lot of times they struggle to go to a more experienced peer to say, hey, where do I turn in my lesson plans, or when do I do just the minutia that goes into being a teacher, and it's our job to create those structures. So we pull them off campus 4 times throughout the year to really induct. They go into classrooms together, they see good instructional practices together, and then able to come out and debrief together. We really saw great impact from that this year as we looked at what classroom walkthrough data and the lack of need on the classroom management side and more on the instructional delivery side, which that first, second, third year teacher is the group that we miss the most.
Dr. Hattie, I want to get your opinion on just the overall alignment. So we're talking a little bit about goal setting for students and then how teachers help them go through that process. But like someone like Lance, who's deputy superintendent, or the school board, how does that process need to work so that everybody's on the same page and it's all trickling down to the student outcome?
Well, I'd like to see, along with our usual accountability measures, so accountability measures from the students themselves. Like, do they feel that this is a class that invites them to come and learn? Do they feel belonging in here? What happens in this class when you make a mistake? Is it okay? And it really then highlights what it's like. Like when I saw the PISA study, 30 million kids, 40% of the students are saying this teacher doesn't care about how I learn. That's a real serious problem. That's never built into our accountability systems. And when I go into the schools that we work with, 100% of them know about what they're learning and why they're learning it, and they know where they are relative to it. Why are they're the only ones privileged? So I want to bring in that alignment from the student voices, and you can do it without naming kids, you can do it without beating up teachers. And when it happens, it's quite magical because it's them. Like if they don't think they're learning, they probably aren't. And so we have to fix it. And one of the things we found in a lot of our work, that a lot of our minority students say, the teacher doesn't like me. Now, it's just not true. The teacher does like them. But if the kid believes that, that's the problem. We know from many hundreds of thousand kids using the apps we use, 40% of them on every time we ask them about what it means, how they're feeling in the class, they say they're bored. We need to know that. They want to be challenged. And we know that if we don't challenge them, they'll challenge us. So we need to get up in front of that.
From the superintendent / deputy superintendent, how do they become involved in that process? Is there a good way or a good time when they should step in to make sure, okay, we're having these conversations with our kids and it's translating from our teachers and the whole system is becoming a part of making sure kids reach their goals? What's their charge? What's the superintendent's charge?
Before I get to that answer, we've got all these tools. Like IReady, great tool. But does it collect student feelings and emotions? Does it collect this? Not because they're necessarily right or wrong, but because they're part of the story. And that's why I want to bring in both sides, because it's a triangulation of those things. And I think that having worked in the politics of government for many, many years, I'm not a fan where superintendents get the data.
Really?
No.
Okay, share, elaborate, please.
I want the superintendents to hear the school's interpretation of the data. And then they can check it. But it's the data is only the first point. If you get data and the school interprets it wrong, the data is useless. Of course I want good data. But I keep saying, I don't want the data. I want to hear your interpretation. Of course I see the data. Of course I'm going to check if it's going on. But it's that whole focus of accountability is on giving data. I want interpretations. And I'm coming to your school. I want to hear interpretation. I'm going to check. I'm going to ask kids. I'm going to look at your data. But I know if he's not interpreting it right, it's having no impact.
Yes. We got a whole other situation if they're misinterpreting what the data represents.
And it's the same with teachers. When they get results from their test, they give their kids. Assessment is feedback to teachers about their impact. I want to hear what they're going to do next. And if the teacher, having done an assessment on kids, hasn't got an answer to the question, so what? Who did you teach well? What did you teach well? Where you go next? You're wasting the kids' time.
I guess that's true. I never really thought about it like that. So in terms of feedback, I feel like, and I've always felt this way, that it's feedback to both students and teachers, there's these huge time gaps. And you know, again, sorry for the sports analogy, but you would never go and see a team working out for a week and the coach not give any feedback within that week. And then all of a sudden on game day, now they're trying to coach these very discrete skills that's needed. And yet we treat staff as if a couple of times a semester is going to be good enough for their growth. And sometimes students the same way, right? We wait to the test and then, well, they failed it. Well, yeah, I could have told you, I could have told you that. I could have told you they couldn't hit a fastball, you know, a week ago. So how do we bridge that gap? And first of all, am I off base with that? Because that's just been my experience. So what's your experience?
No, I think you're spot on. If you're not timely in feedback, then why even give the feedback? And you know, that goes with whether you're talking about administrators going into classrooms providing feedback on the delivery of instruction. I think it's one thing to know the high yield the instructional strategies, another thing to be able to deliver them well. So the job of the administrator is ensure the delivery is meeting the needs there. But also when you're talking about feedback to students, I think you've got to be timely in the feedback you can give. I think about, my time as a high school principal, the English 2 teacher collecting an essay and giving it back to him 3 weeks later. Yeah. Well, 3 weeks has passed. What is the kid going to take away from that feedback that you gave them? And so being timely and ensuring that we are providing quality, timely feedback around whatever we're asking them to do. And that the administrators have to ensure that the delivery of instruction is meeting the needs of the kids. And you can go from one classroom to the next, and the needs of the kids are going to be different, but the instruction should be tailored to meet those individual set of needs.
Well, one of my fascinations at the moment is visible learning in elite sport. We do a lot of work with elite sport teams around the world, sitting in the coach's box, monitoring their feedback. And one of the major lessons is that, like teachers, coaches give an incredible amount of feedback. But was it heard, understood, and actionable? And that's what we sometimes forget. Mm-hmm. And so when we interview the players, it's amazing what they don't hear. It's phenomenal what they don't understand. And most of that feedback has no action. And so we sit in the coach's box during the game, we monitor the feedback, we check then what feedback was heard, understood, and actioned, and then we feed that back. And it's cut down the amount of feedback dramatically and increased the action. And so the coaches are quite stunned and surprised about how much more effective they are during the training and during the game when they reduce feedback on the grounds of what was heard, understood, and actioned. It's no different in the classroom.
Right.
We've focused so much on the quality of feedback we're giving, which we should do, but sometimes we forget. Did they hear it? Did they understand it? Is it actionable?
How are you measuring the action of the players? Is it literally just check marks of
in elite sport? Did they do what the coach asked them to do?
Yeah.
Did they make this move? Did they have this pass? Did they get this right? When it actually has an effect, like the coach gives a specific piece of information, does the player do it? If they don't, no. If they do it, yes. And then we match it up and we feed it back to the coach. This is what worked, this is didn't work. Now, every piece of feedback the coach gives is brilliant. It's not always received.
That's right. It doesn't matter how brilliant it is, they don't understand it. Or if it's in Mandarin and I can't understand.
They were angry in the early days because they had contestants. It's not true. They understand. Well, let's interview some players. And it was embarrassing.
Yeah. That's the problem is being vulnerable enough to see something that is not working.
And ironically, in the early days, the coaches that had the most time for us were ex-teachers. We've now learned how to talk to non-teachers who understand this. But I think that parallel is very close.
Oh, 100%. I mean, because you go to any Little League game and you hear, people doing their best coaching, and you hear hustle and these, very amorphous terms that kids are like,
as a junior coach for many years, I took the job that my job as a coach was during the week. On game day, it was the captain's job. The only one that could talk to me was the captain. The only person I could talk to was the captain because I wanted them to release responsibility.
Sure.
But I cannot stand the coaches screaming at those kids. It's too late.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in the middle of the
chance.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. That, what could we learn from really reflecting on our practice of how we give feedback to teachers, the cadence, the type of feedback, and, our process from the state of how much, and the process is clearly not working as we would like it to.
Yeah, and I think to Dr. Hattie's point of just ensuring that the message is heard, right? Like the clarity around the message that you're receiving and that both parties understand what you're saying and what that looks like. I think about an administrator that I talked to one time, and he was like, this teacher needs to up the level of rigor in their classroom. Well, what does that look like?
Yeah,
did you walk through the process of what does rigor look like, and what's the actionable part of that, and ensuring that our staff understands that. And I think it translates to the feedback that the staff provides students as well. Do they understand what you're getting at? Are you putting it in terms that they understand, and is it actionable for them to make the change? I like the idea of not coaching the kids during the game because the hay's in the barn at that point, and
it really is
not much you're going to do to change it. Just some tactical things. They're parts.
Okay, I've got to ask you, from all of your research and analysis, what has shocked you the most? And maybe if you could start from the frame of which strategy or intervention or something that you found that was highly impactful that you were just like, I got to go double check this because this just doesn't make sense.
I'll answer it slightly different to start with. what stuns me is that of the 400 million kids, 400 influencers, the thing we know least about is the quality of lesson plans. And that's what every teacher worries about every day and every night. We as researchers have not done justice to that at all. So that's the first comment. The second, yeah, there are some things like teacher subject matter knowledge. It has a very low impact. And my fascination, accepting the evidence, why is it so low? You name problem-based learning, inquiry learning, discovery learning, very low. Student control of learning, 0. And so I'm fascinated with those. And I've tried to work through, and I think I have worked through many of them to understand why they're low and fix them. But unfortunately, some people dislike them being low and hate it. Well, that's not going to solve the problem. So those always worry. And I actually get a kick out of finding things like you're saying, and like the subject matter knowledge. It took me 15 years to work out why it was so low. I think I now understand, but I think those really, really are intriguing.
Well, do you ever get, not upset, but do you ever just kind of shake your head in a moment where you see districts throwing money at something that clearly does not work? Not even, yeah, it works a little bit, but.
Well, it's worse than that. I get frustrated when that happens. And I've spent 10 years in a government policy role watching billions of dollars being spent on things that don't work. And part of it's because those politicians have very limited control. It stops at the school fence. So they do stuff out there that we know has a little effect. They don't want to invest in teacher expertise because they can't see it. They can't name it after themselves. I'm being a bit cynical here, but I do worry about that. I do worry about our unbelievably strong claim that high standards and high achievers which run this country. There are a lot of kids out there that are not high achievers that teachers are doing a stunning job with, and we forget those. And there's a lot of kids out there that are high achievers that are cruising, and we forget those. So I do get frustrated at those kind of things. I think we can do a lot better in terms of making the difference. But I have to say, this is my biggest problem. Sorry.
It's okay.
Why is it that educators deny their expertise? Why is it they always claim poor? Why is it they always claim it's too hard? When what I see when I travel the world is stunning excellence. We'd never know it. We're very good at solving problems. We're pretty hopeless at finding success and scaling it up.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think we do a near as good a job of celebrating the successes that happen every single day. I think about the 2 kids that live at my house, and I've got one that's cruising, and I've got one that's working his backside off to ensure that he's maximizing his potential. And if you're talking about just my 2 kids, how many other kids are like that in the 18,500 kids that go to school at Tyler ISD every day?
Last question, because you mentioned a little bit about IReady. Why are you using that? What's the talk through your process of that?
So obviously, big believer in data and the importance of that. And for us as a district, as we see a change in our staff and ensuring that we have the resources available for them, we wanted to do a little addition by subtraction. We were using 3 different programs that did what IReady does. And, one of the things that I really love about IReady is the prescriptive nature of it, making the job easier on the teacher so that they can really focus on the instructional delivery. They don't have to think about, all right, the 3 of us took our beginning of year assessment. You need to work on one skill, you need to work on another skill, and I need to work on another skill. It does that for them so that they can then prescribe what they do to work with that. And obviously IReady does that for them as well. So they're able to really focus on the individual kids and focus on what they need to be successful. And the teacher doesn't have to bear that burden. We ask teachers to do more today than we did 10 years ago. And it's exponential what we ask them to do compared to then. And I just believe that if we're going to have successful student outcomes in our district, we need to utilize a program like IReady that's going to take a burden off of them and they can focus on what they need to, and that's the kids.
Well, Dr. Hattie, thank you for being here and sharing. Like I said, I've been a fan for a long time. I've got to pick up the new book. My wife got it. So you were in Sci-Fair a few days ago. So my wife is a principal in Sci-Fair. So she got the new book, brought it home all excited. I'm like, when did this happen? Like, I didn't know. So I will be picking that up. But anything you want to share, any calls to action for what you're doing or your research? Accelerate.
I think we need to speed up the growth. We need to focus as much on learning as we do on teaching, because that's what kids are passionate about. They don't care how you teach. They care about learning. We need to make that more visible, hence visible learning.
I love it. Dr. Groppel.
just grateful to have great partners like IReady that give us the tools and resources to help our teachers be successful so they can focus on the visible learning techniques and strategies that have the highest yield to impact successful student outcomes.
Thank you very much. And if you like what you heard, or you want to find out a little bit more about IReady, if you can please check out curriculumassociates.com. We'll put a link in the description. I've got some great friends over there. They do great work, and we want to thank everybody for joining us.